Hello my brothers and sisters of the Order, I am Templar, and welcome back to another video on, well, history, in which today I'm going to actually be talking about a subject that many people actually try and avoid and pretty much don't understand. Now, in which this is about, well, as we all know it, the reasons that led to the Civil War. Now, many of y'all don't actually understand the American Civil War, or as well many of y'all that do understand the Civil War, or as well if y'all are just the idiot babies that of which say that the war was just about slavery and whine about it just to get money out of people. Here's the thing. We might actually want to subject this one a little more and as well understand it. Otherwise, it will come back to bite us in the ass. Why do I say that? Well, for one, I hear that many colleges, high schools, and such, and now elementaries and middle schools are trying to take this subject out of history. And in doing so, we're wondering ourselves, what happened to 1860s, ladies and gentlemen? See my point? In which, if we actually understand the history about the American Civil War is what you might call a major point in history. Now, in truth, the reasons behind the war are very hard to explain. Now, I myself had actually been part of reenactment groups, part of American Civil War and such, and I'm a big fan of the American Civil War. In fact, my grandfather actually served in the 4th Texas Infantry, fighting for the Republic of Texas. Now, if any of y'all want to see why Texas fought in the American Civil War, I will leave a link down below in the description, because in truth, the American Civil War has several reasons. Now, before I hear many of you idiots out there saying, "Oh, the war was about slavery! The war was about slavery! I subscribe! I like! I dislike!" See my point? In truth, if you all start whining and saying the war is about slavery and such, and not even looking up the rest of the reasons, that just shows on how much you know little about the war. In truth, the war, in fact, let me put this big out there for y'all. In truth, these are the major 3 broad brush type of, well, idiocies that we're left with. Now, the reason I say 3 is because, in truth, the American Civil War had several reasons. And the thing is, these several reasons were of different states. In other words, one state was fighting for this reason, the other state was fighting for this reason. And in which, it just depends. Now, for a big example, actually, let's take a look at the 3 broad brushes. One of the big broad brushes that idiots always remember is slavery. No. The war, that big broad brush that states that the North was fighting in slavery, non-existent. Literally, did not exist. Another one would be Northern aggression, which, in truth, Northern aggression, this one I have to actually say is a myth. Also, because, in truth, this is not a reason that started the war. In truth, Northern aggression that actually was part of it was actually had to be a part of the Southern Holocaust. If none of y'all know history of what happened to the South was left in ruins, and as well, the Union kinda slaughtered a bunch of innocent civilians, especially in Missouri. Of which, yeah, that did not end well. But as well, another reason also was states' rights. Now, I want to say states' rights is a reason, but the thing is, states' rights is a broad brush that of which also might include slavery, but in truth, that one does not exist either. Now, in truth, these 3 broad brushes we were stuck with from, well, both North and South. Now, I want to explain to y'all that the American Civil War had a major dispute tool design. For example, as I stated last time, Texas was actually fighting for its independence. And in doing so, it kinda actually wanted to, seeing as though that the Union government was technically an asshole. Now, I'll leave a link, as I said, I'll leave a link down below in the description on why Texas was wanting to become its own nation yet again. Now, in truth, we actually understand that Texas actually once had an agreement with Native American groups, in which this was known as the Houston Agreement. This was signed by Sam Houston and many Native Americans. And in doing so, this was actually supposed to keep the lands of Texas and the lands of the Native Americans, well, together. In other words, the territory, well, west of San Antonio would actually belong to the Native Americans, while the territory east of San Antonio would belong to Texians. However, this would all belong technically as a Texas territory, in which Texas kept that ideal up in pretty much many ways. Now, in which many of y'all pretty much don't understand this, but in truth, Texas was a major state, that of which hated the North, or hated the Union, or federal government mainly. Why? Kind of obvious. In truth, many Texans got away from it, and when they were forced to become a slave state again, or something like that, in truth, they actually were a non-slave country for 10 years running, and even prior before that, they were still a free country. Or, I want to say a free, you see my point, non-slavery country, in other words. And as which, many slaves actually ran to Texas to get away from slavery prior before them becoming a slave state. In which many Texans were outraged because they were without slavery for so long, they got used to not having slaves. Now, another thing also is by Texas actually fought back was because of taxation as well. They lost their lands, they were in major debt, so yada yada yada. But as I said, I'll leave that in a link down below with the other video. Now, in truth though, other states and cities that were actually fighting for their independence or were about to become an independent nation was actually New York City. In fact, it was planning on seceding from the Union if it, well, for example, if the siege on Fort Sumter never happened. In fact, if Fort Sumter never was bombarded, then in truth, actually, what would happen is New York City would have become a new country, a major trading country. Now, many of you might wonder, Templar, what does this have to do with this? Kind of obvious. If the American Civil War never happened, New York City would have actually become the major trading hub of the world. In fact, it technically is in the United States still, which, in truth, it could have actually exported, and as which America relied on New York for major resources. So, that's one of the major reasons why actually this happened. But with the Fort Sumter being bombarded and such, well, we already know what happens there. In truth, they just don't actually have any more support because, well, it's stated that the South bombarded them, but I'll probably have to make another video on that. Now, another type of major reason would actually be debt and actually taxes. Debt and taxes are the major problem that actually started this major problem in the first place. This actually majorly happened to Tennessee, Alabama, and Georgia. These states actually were a major, well, in debt. And the thing is, the reason they were falling into debt was because of slavery. In fact, slavery in the South was actually dying off. And the thing is, many times over, Southerners were trying to abolish it. In fact, two famous Southerners, well actually I should say three included, would actually be none other than Jefferson Davis, as well as Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson, who stated that slavery was nothing more than an idiocy of an old man. And in which, that's actually a major thing. In fact, if none of you understand, Abraham Lincoln came from Kentucky the same way as none other than, well, later President General Grant, who also came from the region of Kentucky, and in which also technically owned a slight bit of slaves. However, Grant owned slightly bit more, so yeah. Now, in truth though, the type of debt and taxes that were actually happening to the entire parts of the United States, here's the major thing. The debt and taxes was actually nationwide, but the thing is, these three states, as I said, of Tennessee, Alabama, and Georgia, the reason they actually succeeded because of it was because of the taxation. In fact, taxation and debt was actually skyrocketing. Now, in truth, many of you might wonder, Templar, taxes aren't that bad. Yeah, they kind of are. In which, it's kind of like this. We actually, if none of you understand, taxes is like the 8%. Here's the thing, back during the American Civil War, it was around, or prior, before the American Civil War, for example, it was actually around 10%. And as well, if we actually put that 10% in with an increase by 5%, it was up to 15%. 15% taxes. That means it takes it out of your paycheck. That means it costs a lot more to get groceries. As well, it's going to be a lot more to keep your house up. And as well, many people were actually becoming, well, how should I put this? Oh yeah, kicked out of their own homes by the bank, in which that actually brings on to debt. In fact, the major debt that was skyrocketing and such was affecting the entire United States, in which this happened after the war with Mexico. Not because America actually went to war with Mexico, but because they were running out of supplies, or should I say, money. And of which this brings us to debt. Now, in truth, the debt actually started sometime after the war, or started prior before the war, with Mexico, in which when Texas joined the Union, it became part of the states. And as well, it actually fell into debt also, but the thing is, that debt was actually that made it worse. In truth, the United States was technically already in a major debt crisis, and in doing so, this is actually what actually happened. The United States, well, let's just say, fell into a major debt a little bit sooner than they should have. Now, in truth, though, that's actually my point. When Texas fell into the United States, guess what? Their debt carried with them, and in doing so, that debt increased. And in doing so, it made it harder for many Americans to find jobs, and in which, many times over, everyone was technically, well, losing jobs. They were running out of money, running out of food. In fact, there were even major crises of many cities. In fact, there was a major crisis in the city of Atlanta when, in truth, there was actually a low amount of bread in the said area. No canned goods, nothing. In truth, the Union was about to fall apart right down the smack middle until the Mexican-American War. And in doing so, guess what happened? Both American and Mexican forces fought, and, well, the debt was technically subsided. Problem is, after the war, the military debt skyrocketed with the debt. And in doing so, the southern states were suffering because of it. Now, in doing so, many of you might not know why. Kind of obvious. The North had more resources, or in this case, in truth, the North had more, well, factories. In doing so, guess who actually had the resources? The South. And in doing so, the South had cotton, tobacco, hemp, cocaine, iron ore, and all that jazz. And as which, guess what? That's all that stuff is meant to actually go up north, so that way it can actually be factory made. Problem is, the factory taxation was actually really bad. Now, what do I mean by really bad? It's kind of like this. Say, for example, you buy a t-shirt, say, at Walmart today, and it only costs like $10. Alright? Now, and then you double that amount, and guess what? It's up to $20. So, yeah, that's really bad. And in truth, that means that it's a lot harder to buy said items. And in truth, many Southerners were kind of outraged, because in truth, they kind of felt as though they should just do it in the South. Problem is, there were called business embargoes that actually caused the United States to not actually plant that many factories in the South. In fact, the South could barely actually place any coal mining factories anywhere around the South due to the fact the South was a type of, well, rural country folk region, mostly, unless you lived in the big cities, and of which, that's kind of a big reason. Now, in truth, that actually brings me to another form. The trading embargoes. Now, in truth, the trading embargoes, this really is where it really messed up for the Union. In truth, the first state that actually seceded from the Union was South Carolina, and it actually succeeded because of the trading embargo. Now, the reason they seceded from the Union was because of this major trading embargo. Now, many of you might not reason or understand why. Kind of like this. Say for like you're a business owner trying to send, say, I want to say 400 pounds of cotton or hemp or something to the foreign countries of England, France, or something like that in Europe to actually get a lot more money than you are getting from the North. And in which your kind of business is going into major debt, and in which it's all because the United States government is accidentally becoming too corrupt. They're actually giving more power to some said, well, corrupt leaders, who of which don't know what they're doing. Now, in which, that's the major thing. in which if you were to actually, well, send a trade embargo from one region to the other, it's actually stated that if I was to actually be, say, well, sending this type of amount of supplies up to this, as I said, country, guess what? The trading embargo would have skyrocketed. It's kind of near identical to that of the United States during the American Revolution that led to the American Revolution with the Tea and Stamp Acts, in which it made it harder to actually ship and as well actually deliver some said items to a said region. For example, you couldn't exactly get your said supplies off of a ship, nor could you send them out from the docks, meaning it's near impossible to get money. Now in truth, South Carolina was not the only state that actually went through this. In fact, the state of South Carolina was also followed by Florida, Delaware, Maryland, North Carolina, and as well many of the type of states that are actually along the eastern coastline. Now in truth though, that's my point. Now Maryland and Delaware didn't exactly succeed from the Union, but in truth though, this really led to the downfall of the United States because of this major trade embargo. And in which, that's the major problem. Now in truth though, Missouri, oh, this one I have to put in here because Missouri actually was first part of the Union while they fought against the Confederacy. Thing is though, somewhere point in 1862 or 1861, Northern raids attacked innocent civilians in the region of Missouri. Innocent farmers, that of which were just minding their own business, plowing their fields. In fact, there is actually a film on this known as Josie Wales with Clint Eastwood. And in doing so, it does give a good example on what the Union did. They attacked innocent civilians, who of which were just minding their own business. And in doing so, they were attacked. Now, many of you might wonder, Templar, why would the Union do this? Well, kind of obvious. The Union officers at the time that were stationed in Kansas accidentally mistook a said group of Confederate riders or Confederate cavalry, who of which were raiding said Union outposts in Kansas. Now in truth, it's actually been stated that these groups actually might have been from either Mississippi, Kansas, or in truth from Texas. And as well, nobody actually does know. But the thing is, what happened was, Kansas later actually charged after them into the lands of Missouri and mistook a said farm or said cities in the said region of Missouri and mistook them for Confederate forces. In truth, they actually believed that these Confederate soldiers were hiding in plain sight, taking off their militia uniforms, and in doing so, hiding amongst the innocent civilians. In fact, it was actually stated that Colonel Deber, the man who led this raid, actually stated the following, that the Confederate forces were hiding in plain sight after they attacked us. He was so wrong. In doing so, he committed mass genocide on innocent civilians. And here's the thing, Missouri was once on the side of the Union, but now they attacked their own allies. And guess what? There was a massive mutiny in all of the Union camps. Many of them that were from Missouri despised the Union and actually left and fought back and joined the Confederacy. In which, here's a messed up thing. The Union did this to many innocent civilians. In fact, this is technically really messed up because in which, if now you understand, this led to a massive guerrilla war in Missouri because in truth, the Confederate forces there, or rebel forces as the Union called them, were not exactly, well, part of the Confederacy. These people were actually defending their homes from the Union, who were attacking their own people. Now in truth, this can actually later on be seen in the stories of Vietnam, for example, when it was supposedly stated that Viet Cong actually hid amongst innocent civilians in the Vietnamese people, and in doing so, many soldiers in the Vietnam War accidentally mistook these people for all being Viet Cong. Which, yeah, not the best thing to do. Problem is, the Union did this really messed up throughout the years. In fact, they did this to many people. As well, one famous outlaw, Jesse James, which, yeah, you attack Jesse James, in which they stated that they attacked Jesse James, and as well strung up his stepfather, or beat up his stepfather and strung him up and such, leaving him only to be alive barely. In doing so, Jesse James took his revenge on the Union officers and such by killing them. And then later on joined his brother, Frank James, who was fighting against these Union murderers. Yeah, you can actually understand why you would actually want to do this. I can see his point. In fact, it's kind of like, say, if the government was actually to send their troops over into my town, killing innocent people, or as well killed my grandmother, my grandfather, my mother, including my son or such, I would in the process, well, fight back. I wouldn't just stay and take it. And in which, this is actually really messed up. The Union actually later on did this after the war with many people that lived in the regions of Tennessee, Alabama, and Georgia. And guess who they were trying to round up? The Ku Klux Klan. Yeah, this was really messed up because in truth, Grant accidentally sent the wrong commander into this region, who of which arrested or killed anyone. And guess what? The Union actually then caused further problem. Because in truth, they allowed the Ku Klux Klan to grow stronger and they became more like terrorists. Yeah, that was not probably the best idea the Union ever did, actually, ever. And of which, many times over, even Grant stated that this type of warfare should never have happened. And as well, he even got after many of Union officers that would even dare to have done this. Problem is, the South always remembers. And in which, if you in the process attack innocent civilians, mistaking them for this group, here's the thing, they're going to end up joining the group. The same could easily be said with, well, as I said, with the Confederacy. People that were in Missouri didn't want to stay in the war. They wanted to fight for the Union. But the problem is, because of a Confederate raiding party that just happened to have crossed into Missouri and then passed up by the city and then went back towards somewhere else, guess what? The Union Army comes in, believes the city is part of the Confederate conspiracy, and burns it to the ground. Guess what? In truth, that's what caused many Confederates in Missouri to use guerrilla-style warfare. And in doing so, Kansas was viewed as an asshole state to Missouri. Which we could probably view why actually Missouri and Kansas really hate each other. Now, if none of y'all understand why the North was fighting in the American Civil War, the North was actually fighting to preserve the Union. In truth, it did not actually want the Union to fall. And as well, even Abraham Lincoln stated that if we actually give up now, then in truth, all forms of democracy will end, and all forms of freedom will end. We ourselves must make sure that this house can stand. He even stated to have actually written a bill that would actually pass to the Supreme Court, making sure that slavery would stay and extend to parts of the United States. But guess what? The southern states declined it. It's actually stated the reason why is kind of obvious. The South was not fighting for slavery. They were fighting to protect their homes, to make their livelihoods better. Unfortunately, it made it worse because of the Union. Which, that brings me to another one. In truth, actually, the United States government before the American Civil War had been very corrupted. And in which, many of y'all don't understand this, but the Union Army and such was kind of exactly, a little too terrified of fighting for the Union, seeing as though they kind of were wanting to preserve, the Union. Problem is, they couldn't preserve the Union knowing the fact that technically they're, destroying their liberties and giving it up for tyranny. Now, in truth, the corrupt government in the Union actually was extremely bad. How bad? It's kind of like this. Take a look at the year 2020. The United States government today is extremely corrupt. And as well, I'm not trying to be a politician here, but here's the thing. If we don't look at this point in history of the American Civil War and look at it correctly, we are probably going to see a second Civil War probably after October and such, which they state that might actually happen. Now, in truth, though, that's my major point. In truth, that's what kept the problem. And in which, many times over, many of the South, and none of you understand, the South was mostly made out of rural country folk, who of which, if none of you understand, rural country folk are major, against corrupt government. They are actually mostly, for smaller government, but with better literacies. In which, if you know anything about history, we could probably see that everywhere in history books. Now, in truth, that actually brings me to another point. in which many times over, many farmers actually wanted to preserve their country, but as well they wanted to protect their rights as people. And as well, the corrupt government of the United States was going so far they were actually ratifying the amendments. Literally, the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, the Third, and so on. In truth, even Abraham Lincoln stated that this design of government cannot actually stand. And in doing so, he was even stating to ratify the government and rebuild it from the ground up in the name of liberties and justice and peace. Problem is, by the time he got in office, it was a little too late. In fact, it was already set in motion. The United States was already about to fall. And in doing so, many southern states, they weren't about to actually stand by and watch their country destroy itself. They took, well, the initiative and, well, if we all know it, this stood against the United States government. Now in doing so, though, this is actually a major thing that people don't understand. The entire Confederate Army was made up of militia, not military soldiers. These men were just poor farmers, poor civilians, of which, well, were technically like, well, I guess we could say the National Guard if the National Guard fought back against the government. So yeah. But in truth, even many soldiers that were fighting for the Confederacy weren't fighting to fight against their president. They were stating that we'd rather fight against the government, not our president. In fact, even Jefferson Davis even signed a type of letter sending it to Abraham Lincoln, hoping that the war would never happen. Problem is, it didn't work. Now, this is actually a major point I had to also put in here. The United States also was later on forcing many states to later fight for the Union after the siege of Fort Sumter. These states were Virginia, North Carolina, Arkansas, and Tennessee. These states actually were planning on not staying with the Union. Problem is, when the United States forced them to actually major draft to the many people of the South, they did not join in at all. Literally, this is actually a major thing that why many Southerners actually in which stood against the government. In fact, if you think the draft at Vietnam was bad, here's the thing. The draft during the American Civil War was huge, in which it's actually stated that many times over, America didn't even have the population for the draft. Yikes. Especially by 1863, the draft had become so bad that many times over, many Americans were fighting against their own government in the streets. In fact, New York City, Pennsylvania, and as well many parts of D.C. and so on were despising the United States government, in which actually attacked many government officials on the streets. But when President Lincoln came in to state, to quote-unquote stop it from happening, many people just did not attack him. In truth, that's the major point. Lincoln was trying to end the crisis or conflict by preserving the Union, and many people knew that. Problem is, many people hated their own government. And that's saying something. But now, another reason I also have to put this one in is also the fact of fear. Now, fear, I hear many already. Templar, what do you mean by fear? Now, in truth, fear is one of the biggest reasons why many states in the South succeeded. In which, this can actually be seen in which many people saw the elections. For example, if none of y'all know what happened after the election, when Lincoln took the oath in office, many people will think, oh, no, this one in the South, this immediately all succeeded. No, it did not happen like that. In truth, the reason why Lincoln got in office was because of a landslide of the votes. But the thing is, in fact, the only reason that why Lincoln won was because of a landslide, in which Lincoln stated that as soon as he was in office, he was going to ratify the government and fix it. Problem is, if you don't understand what, well, Lincoln was, he was a Republican. Now, before I hear any idiotic idiocy of modern day and yada 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 saying the Republicans are bad or something like that, here's the thing. Let me tell you this, you might want to listen. In truth, the Republican Party was a new party. Now, in truth, many of y'all might wonder, oh, Templar, what's the point of that then? Well, here's the thing. The Republican Party was a new party that just came out of the ashes of the Whig Party. And in doing so, the Democrats were before them. Now, It's kind of like this, for example. Say, for example, say, like the Republican Party stood standing today, but the Democrat Party just collapsed and a new party erupted from it. And in doing so, this technically does happen a lot of times with third-party governments or whatever who want to, well, correct the government and such. In which, if none of you understand, America has millions of parties that of which are technically not even on the radar of many people's brains. In fact, people just think Democrat and Republican. Which, if none of y'all know what I am actually, well, a Republican Democrat. Or a Democrat-Republican, whatever you want to call it, and of which is technically the same party as, well, Thomas Jefferson. Now, in truth, I want to be like the Progressive Party, like Theodore Roosevelt, or something else. You see my point? There are many parties, and as which these smaller parties actually, well, erupt. Now, in truth, though, the Republican Party actually, as soon as Lincoln got in office, literally what happened was the Republican Party actually took off and took over the entire United States government incredibly quickly. In fact, I'm not talking like 1 day quickly, I'm talking like 1, 2, 3 days quickly. In doing so, the South saw like, well, in doing so, in fact, I'm not even understand, the South is a major Democrat zone, not because of slavery, but because of the fact they actually saw that this was a new type of party that was going to corrupt the government. In which, if we were to see this today with both the Republican Party and Democrat Party losing to a third party out there, and it pretty much overwhelms the entire country, and it somehow wins by a landslide, you would actually immediately run for your gun and actually just hunker down and such. Because in truth, no one would actually just stay for it. And as well, many people thought that the Republican Party was the end of the United States. Which, well, I guess you could actually probably agree with that. Because in truth, many people would actually worry what would happen to their country. Hence the reason they succeeded. Now, the reason why the secession actually, well, worked so quickly and such was, well, what you might call the ending of the corruption of government. But the thing is, Lincoln even stated that the United States government will be ratified for the American people. And as well, he was actually even asking many Democrats and Republicans, or Whigs, to actually join him and actually creating a better government. Thing is, though, as I stated prior, Lincoln was already too late. It was too far gone for the United States. And as well, as I stated with those corrupt officials, many of them were actually from either the North, and of which made their way to the South, and actually ran the state into the ground. Many of those corrupt officials actually, nearly in the process, were actually executed on sight for destroying their own country. So, yeah, but the major reasons behind the war were not slavery. They were not Northern aggression. Well, unless you're counting Missouri. And as well, they were not about states' rights. They were majorly around about the type of amendments, the rights of the American people, as well as the debts, taxation, and many more. Now, in truth, I want to also put out there that the Confederacy, no, it was not known as a major Confederate nation. In truth, we only know that because of some stories and such, and because, well, people viewed it as becoming its own nation. But in truth, the idealism of it becoming its own nation only happened sometime around 1863 and such. But in the early years of the war, not so much. Kind of like the same with the American Revolution. So I have to put that out there for y'all. And no, Texas was not technically a state part of the Confederacy. It was actually its own country that joined the Confederacy as an ally. But the thing is, the entire Confederacy was actually mainly of militiamen fighting for their country, fighting to restore the government. Now, in truth, why is this actually known? Kind of obvious. The South was fighting to restore the government of the American people, which the same thing could be said about Lincoln. Problem is, it was a little too late for it by the time he got in. In doing so, well, we see the problem with that. But the thing is, the corrupt government in the United States destroyed America so far that of which it just did not work. and in which, many times over, we can actually see this today with an American nation nearly on the brink of civil war a second time. It would not be about slavery. It would not be about racism. It would be because of corrupt government, the taxation, rights, and as well the liberties of the American people being threatened by the corruption of leaders. So in truth, ladies and gentlemen, the reason why I'm putting this out there is to make sure my country does not go into a second civil war. Now in truth, because of the American Civil War, the outcome of it, we have the ending of slavery. We have the more rights in the government. We have the ending of a corrupt government. Problem is, many people say that we might have to go to a second civil war to actually get rid of another corrupt one. Which, I'm sad to say, that might be true. But ladies and gentlemen, please do not actually always believe the broad brush dreams that of which any history teacher could probably just read in 5 seconds. Because in truth, conflicts start for many several reasons. They are not just one. And of which the American Civil War had sparked major problems long prior before it. And of which slavery was only 1 to 3%. And that's the major problem. Many people don't remember that. I'm Celtic Templar. Hopefully you like this video, guys. Like and subscribe. Also check out that bell button, and as well also check us out on Facebook, so that way you know of a next upcoming video, and as well other things we will describe. Anyways, guys, this has been Templar. Have a great day, and God bless.